Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman, Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, November 16th, 2017. We're in a little bit of a state of disarray this morning. I think Donald Trump is screwing with us here. I don't think it's really him, but we got a bit of a situation going on here today. So there may be some noise, and there has been, of course, for the last 2 weeks or so. But I am a refugee from my refugee camp at this point, rather than working downstairs in the basement, as we have been for the last 2 weeks because of the construction work going on here at Kagro World Headquarters. Next door, which I guess is Kagro in the Afternoon World Headquarters. I don't know. Well, what should we call it? It's the neighbors. We have new neighbors. Hi, welcome to the neighborhood. And today is the day that I guess they've started to start construction. It's a good time for it. The fall is a good time for construction work. You can usually get it done cheap, and I guess they're putting up, I don't know, maybe a patio under their deck or a second level, a wood patio, I think, to match the deck upstairs. Not that I'm complaining, because, the Homeowners Association really requires that you get the permission of all adjacent neighbors for any such construction as that, and no one has asked me about it, but who am I to be? I don't want to be the jerk neighbor. I would absolutely sign the paperwork, but I had to go around and embarrass myself and knock on all the doors of all the neighbors. Anybody who could even see what I was putting up, whether they were adjacent to me or not, had to sign off on putting a deck. That's just Homeowners Association stuff for you. Nobody asked me about this, but I would have signed anyway. But that means, I don't know, there's some drilling, some pounding, some God knows what, some excavation. I don't know what's going on, but they're putting it up next door to me, and that means it would have been right outside the window where I had been taking refuge from the noise of our own work here. So I'm back at where I'm supposed to be, back at our regular world headquarters. So I'll be getting assailed from noise from above. Our construction work is going on directly above my head, where that's where I'm now situated, and directly beneath my feet there'll be construction work from next door. Not directly beneath my feet, because of course it's next door, but I'm in a townhouse. It's not that far over, so it should be really interesting. We have no phone-in guests today, so you'll have to listen. We can pretend I'm having a conversation about poles with with the poles that they're putting in to support whatever it is they're building next door. I hope they're not just tearing down their deck and replacing it wholesale. But that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, so I hope that's not the case. We'll see. I guess we'll see if I can update you during the breaks. I can look outside and see what's being built and what their progress is on it. Daily Coast Radio, despite it all, is live now. And as Bill reminds us all the way from Portland, Maine, at the end of his rope, Kagro X seeks comfort from his religious heritage by shouting, Roy Vey. It's true. We're back. We're going to be back on what I'm now calling Roy Vey Moore. Because, as the joke I've been making for weeks now, there's this moron Moore, and it just keeps getting worse. He cannot stay out of the news, and he's not interested in staying out of the news. He's going to just stand and fight, and he thinks that all attention is positive attention. We mused a little bit yesterday about when we would be hearing about predations that took place after he got married. We talked a little bit about his wife, Kayla, and when he met her and how he met her. And, she was 20-something, so it's all relatively on the up and up, I guess. Although there was some weird hint that he may have spotted her early, but I guess there was no opportunity to do any grooming. So I don't know. I guess, is it as close to what you can call fair game as anything? He saw her at a dance recital, but there's no indication that he approached her at any point in between that and meeting her later after having returned to Alabama from a side joint to Texas and Australia. Great points being brought up to me in Twitter yesterday. I think after the show, we did wonder about Why did he leave? There's no really, he doesn't address in any way in any of his autobiographies why he left to Texas and Australia. They're fine places to go. I'd like to visit them both too. I've been to Texas, I don't know, once, I guess. And it was nice. I went to Austin, which you can imagine is, you know, if you've been there, is, let's say among the most welcoming places in terms of the Texas culture for progressives, I guess. I'm sure that the state is fine for everyone everywhere, and visitors of all ages will enjoy the Texas, as my kids called it. They were very young at the time, but haven't been to Australia. Would love to go. It would be terrific. And yet, I wonder about Roy Moore and his interest in, I mean, you know, it's obviously both great tourist destinations, but my question was whether anyone had asked about the coinciding of his banning from the Gadsden Mall and the YMCA and his decision to go abroad, essentially, and for how long. All the newspaper story said was that he left in 1983, returned in 1984. Was it in December, 29th, 1983, and back in January of 84, or was he gone for a year? Was he waiting for things to cool down from his bannings? I do not know. We don't know. We got to find out. It would be nice to know. And like I said, great points being made to me on Twitter the other day. I, at this point, want to know, were there any complaints lodged against a Roy Moore anywhere in Texas or anywhere in Australia, for that matter? I would think that would maybe be an important inquiry. What if police heard from the locals about a strange guy with an Alabamian accent who showed up all of a sudden and started harassing the teens? He wasn't a district attorney there, but, I mean, whatever. I'd be curious to know, and I think we'd all be curious to know. Anyway, we mused after finding out about his marriage about whether or not there were any predations reported after his marriage, and I guess there are. That's the first of the stories post-marriage has come out, although it does not involve a minor. It does involve leveraging his office at the time and basically just being the kind of creep that should get you in trouble with the electorate anyway. It was reported, let's see, who had that story? Was that in the Washington Post story or in the AL.com story? There were two alleging that new charges were being leveled. Again, not charges, not formal charges. By the way, before I even spin off into that, well, you know what, I'll save that for later. Okay, we'll go straight to Roy Moore. Why not at this point? Like I said, something from Washington Post, something from AL.com. AL.com, I don't know, I didn't read all the way through everything last night. There was so much information I had to sort of skim everything. I don't know if they're both talking about the same two women now, because both stories say there's two new names, and it may mean a total of four. Let's take a look at AL.com first. New Roy Moore accuser. He didn't pinch it, he grabbed it. That's the headline, and that's not good. Illustrated by a photo of the young woman in question here. A picture of Tina Johnson with her young son here about 6 years before she met Moore at his Gadsden office. I don't know why they selected a photo from 6 years before, but it illustrates the point nicely, giving it a very 70s feel. And, Tina Johnson, I say young woman, she was an adult at the time, so I think I have the terminology right. Anna Claire Vollers is the byline on this story. A Gadsden woman says Roy Moore groped her while she was in his law office on legal business with her mother in 1991. That sounds familiar. Moore was married at that time, 1991, of course. I think he got married in 1985. In the past week, Moore has been accused by 5 other women of a range of behaviors that include sexual misconduct with a woman when she was 14. We know that story. And sexual assault of another woman when she was 16. We heard that was the latest one we discussed yesterday. This is the first public accusation of physical contact that happened after Moore was married. And I wondered about that. Like I said, we talked about it a little bit yesterday, but it almost inevitably had to have happened, right? I mean, we were a little bemused by the fact that although an adult at the time that they met and were introduced, and certainly at the time that they were married, he and his wife Kayla had a large age difference, which didn't concern us so long as she was an adult. But it was an interesting coincidence, let's say, that Kayla was a classmate of the 16-year-old woman who became his fifth accuser, the one who was reporting an assault in his car. They were both in high school together. So he ended up marrying a woman of the same age as one of the women he had previously allegedly assaulted. And that held some interest. But again, if you wait until they're in their 20s, I suppose there's not much objection you can have to it. Certainly not legally anyway. But it raised some questions in that I began to wonder, well, now his wife is 23, 24 years old. If he really has a, strong attraction to the younger girls, is that going to stop? And it's entirely possible. I mean, some of these guys, I imagine somewhere, particularly those who have that strange basis in Southern Baptist religion or whatever his particular sect may be, just sort of mentally in their minds, the way to handle your dating / raping / sexual life, depending on what it is you're doing with your time as a young man, they think it's a normal thing to be doing, and then to switch it off once they're married and just say, that's what I did when I was unmarried, in an attempt to get married. Perhaps they even think that, that's like a legitimate way of pursuing a lifetime partner. And then once they find one, they switch it off. But I wondered whether Roy would have a hard time switching it off. And if it was really the fact that he was chasing down teenagers that was of interest to him, I don't know if a 24-year-old wife would be enough for him to decide to switch it off. And I guess we're about half right there. He didn't switch it off, but in this case, he wasn't pursuing a teenager. But still, I guess to no one's surprise, he was unable to leave the predations behind. The story does continue saying that in recent days, Moore has publicly denied any wrongdoing and has denied knowing some of the women. The first in this AL.com report, again, Tina Johnson. In interviews with AL.com, Tina Johnson recalls that in the fall of 1991, she sat in the law office of then attorney, I guess just private attorney, Roy Moore on 3rd Street in Gadsden. Her mother, Mary Catherine Cofield, sat in a chair next to her. Moore sat behind his desk across from them. Johnson remembers she was wearing a black and white dress. So, almost from the moment she walked into Moore's office, Johnson said Moore began flirting with her. Again, in this setting, she's the daughter accompanying her mother for some legal dealings with their, I guess, maybe the mom's attorney, Roy Moore, private attorney at that point. Almost from the moment she walked into Moore's office, Johnson said Moore began flirting with her. He kept commenting on my looks, telling me how pretty I was, how nice I looked, recalled Johnson. He was saying that my eyes were beautiful. It made her uncomfortable. I was thinking, can we hurry up and get out of here? Johnson, at this point, was 28 years old, the oldest woman that so far he's reported an attraction to, or that has been reported on his behalf, let's say. I don't know if he would call it on his behalf. Though his wife at that point would have been older than that. So presumably he's attracted to her as well. But hey, I'm not going to put myself in the middle of that one. Johnson, 28 years old, in a difficult marriage, headed toward divorce and unemployed. She was at the office to sign over custody of her 12-year-old son to her mother. Okay, so it's her own legal proceeding. Mom is just accompanying her. Sign over custody of her 12-year-old son to her mother, with whom they'd been living. Her mother had hired Moore to handle the custody petition. So back to the other side of that. In fact, mom's the client. It's the daughter, Tina's legal troubles that they're settling, but mom is the client in this case. Johnson had 2 young daughters at the time with her then husband, and her son said he wanted to live with his grandmother. So I'm sure busy time in the Johnson house if the 2 young daughters That can be demanding. A 12-year-old can easily be feeling left out in all of that. And grandma maybe can give them a lot more attention. And, they all live in the same town, I hope. And so it sounds like an interesting solution, but not unusual is what I'm getting at here. Anyway, Johnson had 2 young daughters at the time with her then husband, and her son said he wanted to live with his grandmother. At one point during the meeting, she said, Moore came around the desk and sat on the front of it, just inches from her. He was so close, she said, she could smell his breath, which must have been awfully pleasant. I wonder if he has Tic Tacs. Who was it that brought that one? I wonder if he carries a box of Tic Tacs around with him. According to Johnson, he asked questions about her young daughters, oh my, including what color eyes they had and if they were as pretty as she was. She said that made her feel uncomfortable too. No doubt. Once the papers were signed, she and her mother got up to leave. After her mother walked through the door first, she said Moore came up behind her. It was at that point, she recalled, he grabbed her buttocks. We are a medical show here. We're going to go with buttocks on that. And that's what's in the report, too. It's not a stretch for me. He didn't pinch it. He grabbed it, said Johnson. And interesting that even a distinction should be made, because a pinch would be improper as well. And almost certainly unwelcome. And I don't know, maybe even a little bit painful, depending on how it's done. But it's interesting, sort of maybe hints at the possibility that back in them days, that was something that was that accompanied a young, attractive woman standing up from her chair, which is wrong and horrible. But she distinguishes it just in case you had any question about it. He didn't pinch it, he grabbed it. She was so surprised, she didn't say anything, and she didn't tell her mother. Also, far from unusual, I think we should note, even though the article glosses right over it, I think that that's meant to imply that it was just simply wrong, and that's that. But there you go. She said she told her sister years later how Moore had made her feel uncomfortable during that meeting. Her sister told AL.com she remembers the conversation. Johnson reached out to AL.com earlier this week to talk about her experience with Moore. AL.com located the court documents from 1991 detailing the custody transfer, just by way of proof, I guess. Cofield's petition for custody is signed by Roy S. Moore, attorney. It lists his address as 924 3rd Avenue, Gadsden, so it all checks out. Johnson has had ups and downs in her life. Once again, you'll see why this is being reported in a minute. Both before and after she met Moore, she has pled guilty to writing bad checks and for third-degree theft of property, which she said stemmed from family disagreements over the care of her late stepfather. You can see how that might develop. Since marrying her husband, Morris Johnson, in 2010, she said she has been working to improve her life. I'm not perfect, she says. I have things in my background, and I know the public will jump on anything. But what happened with Moore is still the truth, and the truth will stand when the world won't. Interesting way of putting it. So by the way, that obviously being reported, just like as was the case with the Washington Post, AL.com wants to make sure that everybody knows that they are aware of her background and they find it unpersuasive in terms of discounting her story. But just so you don't think you're the first one to dig it up and we're all aware of it and it's all out there, we'll include it in the story in the way of protection and showing you that we did our homework as well. But once again, this comes up, and it occurred to me, hearing it a second time, after having heard it with respect to the first girl, now woman, to come forward, the 14-year-old who was approached, remember, on the bench outside the courthouse while awaiting a custody hearing. This does start to create a strange pattern in your mind. And it occurred to me, two things are happening here. First of all, this is the second story of predation on on anyone involved in a custody dispute, which of course is a signal that something's going on at home, and we're not talking necessarily about a happily married woman or a happily domiciled child in the case of the 14-year-old. But one, there's some vulnerability there. Two, there's some question about the presence of men in the home who might, let's say, blow his head off with a shotgun. You know how those Southern guys like to talk. I don't recommend that that's a good course of action, but I've found in the course of our gun reporting, say, that there's a certain predilection for insisting that it is the purpose and life of the grown men at home, or even sometimes older brothers, or even younger brothers if they're of a certain age, to blow the head off of any predators or even honorable suitors who might come around their sisters or, in some cases, their moms. But apparently none present in most of these cases. But the other light that went on for me here is from the fact that both the Washington Post and AL.com spent so much time, or any time at all, I guess I should say, explaining that they were aware of the various, what you might call, shortcomings of these women's backgrounds or vulnerable areas where they might be attacked for whatever reason, to see their stories undermined. And that's when it occurred to me, what we're looking at here is Roy Moore preying on women who not just happened to come around to visit him in the courthouse or be near his place of employment. And I mean, that's an awfully risky place to be doing your preying on women and girls. But obviously he made no distinction in his life between proper and improper. That doesn't surprise me so much. But I think what happens here is he's preying on not only the vulnerable, but also on people that he knows to have trouble in their backgrounds that he can use against them should they ever find the courage to speak up. You can't believe her. She's had multiple bankruptcies and several divorces. It's what we heard about the first accuser. And now, same sort of thing, I guess, being threatened here, even though AL.com does a pretty good job of inoculating her against these charges. But just another indicator of the kind of guy I think Roy Moore may be. All right, well, let's continue on with this. Johnson, who's now disabled, considers herself a devout Christian and regularly attends church near her home in Gadsden. She said she's not political and doesn't follow politics. She said she has not spoken with Moore since that day in his office and does not know any of the 5 other women who have come forward with accusations against him. This is not a politics thing with me, she said. It's more of a moral and religious thing. It has bothered her over the years to see Moore on TV talking about his Christian faith. She wanted to come forward publicly now, she said, because it's hard for victims of harassment to talk openly about their experiences. I want people to know that it's okay to finally say something, she said. I guess I'm ashamed I didn't say nothing. Didn't turn around and slap him. Yeah, I can feel that would be an issue. And it probably is an issue with a lot of people. And that'll keep them quiet for a while, but it also adds to their self-doubt. I mean, you never know how much of the rest of their lives this stuff gets in the way of. It's really rather amazing. Anyway, we'll continue on here. A spokesperson for the Roy Moore campaign, contacted in advance, I guess, of their publication, says, let's see, gave no response by publication time. Next section here, it's just sort of subtitled All the Time. In 1982, Kelly Harrison Thorpe, this would be before he was married, was working as a hostess at the Red Lobster restaurant in Gadsden, and prior to his leaving Alabama the first time, by the way. She was 17 years old and a high school senior. One day, Roy Moore came into the restaurant and she recognized him. He was a public figure in this small town, she said of Moore, who at the time was in his early 30s and the deputy district attorney for Etowah County. Later that year, he would mount an unsuccessful campaign for circuit court judge. Thorpe said Moore asked her if she'd go out with him sometime. I just kind of said, "Do you know how old I am?" she recalled. And he said, "Yeah, I go out with girls your age all the time," which happens to be true, though might easily enough be dismissed as a lie at the time if you didn't know his reputation. Thorpe said she turned him down and told him she had a boyfriend. She said he then walked away. Thorpe said she later told a family member but did not tell the story publicly. She moved away from Gadsden the following year, as he did, by the way, and has just recently moved back. Thorpe knows of Moore's accusers, or knows one of Moore's accusers, Lee Korfman. That was the girl who was 14 at the time, who told the Washington Post that Moore had a sexual encounter with her when she was 14. We'll leave the language aside for the moment. Thorpe believes Korfman's story and said she is proud of her for telling it publicly. In an interview on Sean Hannity's radio show last Friday, Moore said he did not, quote, generally, unquote, date girls in their late teens when he was in his early 30s. If I did, I'm not going to dispute anything, he said, but I don't remember anything like that. Well, everybody else does. As more GOP leaders, including Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, are calling for Moore to step aside, he has given no indication that he plans to do so. He still has a lead in most polls, but new polling out this morning and being shared with me via Twitter says the opposite. One question often levied at the accusers, I think it probably should be leveled, but maybe levied works there, at the accusers is why they didn't come forward publicly before now, a month away from the special election for Alabama senator. Moore has been a public and often controversial figure in Alabama politics for decades. Okay, it's a question. The piece continues here. It's an issue both Johnson and Thorpe wanted to address. Thorpe said local women have not spoken publicly against Moore before now because he had power in town and in the state, and they didn't think they would be believed. Everybody knew it wouldn't matter, she said, that he would get elected anyway because his supporters are never going to believe anything bad about him. And that is frequently worried about by a lot of accusers in a lot of situations. Of course, that music means it's time for our first meaningless break, but it's a good time for me to take a break and check into the situation happening around me. We can sum up this story, as a matter of fact, before we take that break. Anyway, everybody knew it wouldn't matter, and his supporters aren't going to believe anything bad about him anyway. Johnson said the answer was even more simple. It's because nobody asked, she said. If anybody had asked, we would have told it. No one asked. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. We are back. Everything's smooth sailing so far with respect to construction. My guys haven't showed up yet, although that has me a little bit concerned. But next door is relatively quiet. So maybe they're building, I don't know, maybe they're building a ball pit or a trampoline park or something really quiet, covered in pillows perhaps. But so far so good, and we'll knock on some wood there and hope things just, stay together and hold out for us, and maybe they all take a break until 11 o'clock. Okay, so that's the AL.com story, and I think we're talking about two distinct cases here. I think that AL.com has 2 more women, bringing the total to 7, and the Washington Post also has a story titled 2 More Women Describe Unwanted Overtures by Roy Moore at Alabama Mall. Neither of the 2 we read about happened at the mall. So these 2, I think, are going to be accusers number 8 and 9. Let's take a look at the Washington Post story. And there's some behavior in there you likely would have been talking about last night if you heard about it. Stephanie McCrumman, Beth Reinhardt, and Alice Kreitz, and I'm not sure if it's Kreitz, no idea, Krites. Alice, you can call me and let me know. I won't bother you after hours, whatever. like Roy Moore does. Once again, illustrated with photos dated to the 70s and making clear that, well, I don't know. I don't know if any sort of pattern is emerging necessarily beyond Roy Moore's interest in young girls and young women at the time who all would have had the same hairstyle, I guess. But it's pretty creepy and a weird throwback sort of illustration. And I don't know. It makes you wonder, is all I can say. Okay. Gina Richardson. Definitely not a name we've had before, right? Gina Richardson says she was a high school senior working in the men's department of Sears. Well, if you didn't want to be hit on, you shouldn't have been working in the men's department. I'm sure people are thinking somewhere in Alabama or elsewhere. Working in the men's department of Sears at the Gadsden Mall when a man approached her and introduced himself as Roy Moore. Okay. A man would, I'm sure, frequently approach her if she's working in the men's department at Sears. I don't know how many introduced themselves, but that seems friendly enough. He said, "You can just call me Roy." This was in the fall of 1977, and I guess well before the advertising campaign that made use of that, "You can call me Roy." And that must have generated some laughs around Gadsden in the days when that finally came out. Anyway, he said, "You can just call me Roy," says Richardson, Gina, that is, who says this first encounter happened in the fall of 1977, just before or after her 18th birthday. She can't recall which, I guess, as Moore, then a 30-year-old local attorney, was gaining a reputation for pursuing young women at the mall in Gadsden, Alabama. His overtures caused one store manager to tell new hires to, quote, "watch out for this guy." Another young woman to complain to her supervisor, and Richardson, another young woman to, what does that mean? His overtures caused, yes, okay. There we are. Overtures caused one store manager to tell new hires to watch out, caused another young woman to complain to her supervisor, and caused Richardson to eventually hide from him when he came into Sears, the women say. That's rather disturbing. Richardson says Moore, now a candidate for U.S. Senate, asked her where she went to school, so it was pretty clear to him how old she was, and then for her phone number, which she says she declined to give, telling him that her father, a Southern Baptist preacher, he might not shoot me, would never approve. Okay, well, fine. That's about as much as you can expect out of poor Gina in this situation, but do take note of this, and you don't have to remember for long because the rest of the story is coming. He asks for her phone number. She says no. What do? You're Roy Moore. I gotta get a hold of this girl to ask her out on a date. Can I have your phone number? No. What does he do? A few days later, she says, you already know the answer. You read the story or talked about it on Twitter. A few days later, she says she was in trigonometry class. No dummy here, right? Trigonometry class at Gadsden High, when she was summoned to the principal's office over the intercom in her classroom. She had a phone call. Okay, at least they had the discretion not to say, "Gina, please come to the office. An old man is hitting on you by phone." Maybe they didn't know. They probably didn't know, right? We'll talk about it in a second. I said hello, Richardson recalls. That seems like a valid recollection. And the male on the other line said, "Gina, this is Roy Moore." I was like, "What?" He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm in trig class." "Not anymore, you're not. You're in the office speaking to me on the phone." Richardson says Moore asked her out again on the call. Now, there's more to the story, but again, we have to take a brief timeout. Not for a break, but to say, ew, what the hell is going on here? I mean, just for a second. We'll take a pause to say, let's be clear about what's going on here. The guy asked for her phone number. She wouldn't give it to him, but he had solicited from her what school she went to. And there weren't a great deal of choices, I'm sure, in Gadsden in 1977. I don't know how many high schools they actually had there, but he could probably figure it out. But he knew. I guess she must have answered him on that one. And so he does what? Well, I know if I call the office and say that, I need you to page Gina Richardson, or whatever her last name was at the time, to the office where I need to speak with her. Well, Ordinarily, you would think now, obviously, it would arouse some suspicion. Well, who's calling, please? Is it Mr. Richardson or is it someone else? Well, ordinarily, like if he just says, well, it's Roy Moore, who knows what the reaction is? I mean, for one thing, I guess it could happen that the principal or the secretaries at the high school say, oh, Roy Moore, everybody knows that guy. He's the guy that creeps on girls at the mall. And there's really no good reason to connect the two of them. I'm sorry, Mr. Moore, she's in class. Now, at that point, that's if they know. And if they don't, they might say, well, what's this about? Roy Moore almost undoubtedly, it's not reported here, but almost undoubtedly has to tell the secretaries, I'm Roy Moore, the district attorney, and I need to speak with her. And he may or may not have said explicitly that it was official business of the DA's office, but it'd be enough if you say, this is Roy Moore of the district attorney's office. I need to speak with Gina Richardson, please. She's a student at your school. Make it sound like it's official business. And I'm sure the secretaries would ask very few questions and then page her to he, in other words, leveraged his official position in all likelihood to get these secretaries at the local high school to pimp for him. Get me the girl that I want to talk to who won't give me her phone number. I can always track her down there under the guise of official business and force her to the phone. She won't know who's calling because they had some discretion in the office. They didn't call over the intercom and say, Gina Richardson, please report to the office. The district attorney's office is calling for you. They thought they were sparing her some embarrassment, probably. Meanwhile, they were setting her up for some. But how were they to know? Unless, of course, they were clued into the fact that he was a predator, in which case the story is just that much worse. Anyway, wow. I mean, the prospects of that. I mean, I guess this isn't the case because according to this story, he meets her at the mall and then decides that the only way he can get to her, since she won't give the phone number, is to call the school. But is that far removed really from, you recall from the other day, we learned about the fact that he had signed this other girl's yearbook. I mean, you can almost picture the guy sitting in his office, flipping through the local high school yearbook, picking out the hot chicks that he wants to get in touch with and thinking, I could call the office and have them page these girls to the phone and arrange to meet them. But then again, I don't know, maybe that would be creepy and weird. But the thought almost certainly crossed his mind, and he basically did exactly that anyway. I just shop for them in the mall instead, find out what high school they go to, and now I know how I can track them down if they won't give me their number. And it was very upsetting to think about the prospect of him being that creepy when, of course, the yearbook thing, it struck me, well, that's actually the premise of Facebook originally. Ugh. So I'm ready to jump off the planet at this point. Luckily, that did develop into something else, but it is a multi-billion-dollar business model. And, I guess you ought not to leave behind that the original intent was for people to be able to, for computer nerds to be able to not have to leave their keyboard to prowl through the Facebook, as they called it, at Harvard. Other schools perhaps have other terminology for it. But the freshman directories that come out each year, I wonder whether they stopped publishing such things. Certainly they stopped publishing them, I would guess, on paper and maybe put them online, perhaps password protected and all that. But back in the day, they printed those things under the guise of, well, you need to get to know the new incoming freshman class so that you can be friendly and socialize with them and welcome them to our institution. When in fact, even then, they knew that it was mostly probably being used by upperclassmen, and I do mean the upper class men, to flip through and look for the hottest new freshmen coming to town so that maybe they could jump on them and hit on them and ask them for dates before they were exposed to the rest of campus. Or whatever, and they could pick them up before they got wise to who were the jerks on campus and who were not, whatever. I don't know. I didn't do such things, but I know many who did, I guess. Was it my responsibility to stop them? I guess looking back on it now, well, these are mostly guys that I didn't know very well. But even so, everybody loves to look through that book and see who's coming in, and if they ever set themselves up as predators, well, Shame on them. But even so, even if they didn't, people wanted to look at those things. It's a business model now. Oh, and it changed the course of our election and made Donald Trump president. So really nothing good has come of it, frankly. I guess even displaying pictures of your grandchildren. Honestly, there was probably another way to do that. Anyway, leave the technology portion of our show behind and continue on with the Washington Post story. Richardson says that Moore asked her out again on the call. It didn't work out, of course. But a few days later, after he asked her out at Sears, she relented and agreed, feeling both nervous and flattered. They met that night at a movie theater in the mall after she got off work, which is a nice enough thing to do if you're dating someone near your age, I guess. A date that ended with Moore driving her to her car in a dark parking lot behind Sears and giving her what she called an unwanted, forceful, as is put in quotes here, forceful kiss that left her scared. Well, not terribly surprising, I guess, but once again, another little piece of evidence here. Yes, granted, it was after work and she was already at the mall, but once again, meeting at the movie theater. That's interesting, because I put that in the category with the other girl, Lee, who was asked to meet him around the corner from her house. Recall that he insisted, Roy Moore did, to Sean Hannity that he always had the mother's permission, as though that meant anything. And I think we're getting a good sense of what it actually meant. He didn't have anybody's permission. People, one, who are dating others for whom they need a parental permission slip, have something going on. And two, people who meet their quote-unquote dates around the corner from their house or at the movie theater at the mall rather than picking them up do not generally really, I don't think it should be trusted if they claim to have parental permission. That's not getting parental permission. That's sneaking around the backs of the parents. That is predatory behavior, as if we hadn't had enough examples. Anyway, outcome of this so-called date, I never wanted to see him again, says Richardson, who's now 58 and a community college teacher living in Birmingham. She describes herself as a moderate Republican and says she didn't vote in the 2016 general election or in this year's Republican Senate primary in Alabama. Moore's campaign did not directly address the new allegations. It couldn't keep up with them. There were 4 just yesterday. In a statement, a campaign spokesman cast the growing number of allegations against Moore as politically motivated. If you are a liberal and hate Judge Moore, apparently he groped you, the statement said. That's a great statement. By the way, I don't believe we have found a victim yet who described themselves as liberal. Almost all of them are describing themselves as either apolitical or Republican. If you are a conservative and love Judge Moore, you know these allegations are a political farce. And if you don't love Judge Moore, sooner or later, he'll get around to loving you, I guess, is probably what they left that part out. Richardson, whose account was corroborated by classmate and Sears coworker Kayla McLaughlin, is among 4 women who say Moore pursued them when they were teenagers or young women working at the mall, from Sears at one end to the Pittett's department store at the other. Richardson and Becky Gray, the woman who complained to her manager, have not previously spoken publicly. The accounts of the other 2 women, Wendy Miller and Gloria Thacker Deason, have previously been reported by the Washington Post. And again, we'll call time out here to say lots of examples of his predation at the mall make sense of the report that Roy Moore was banned from the Gadsden Mall. Once again, I need to point out, I think we have not yet heard the story that got Roy Moore, allegedly, banned from the YMCA. That still means that there's more to come. We're up to 9 accusers. That's a lot. There is at least a 10th out there, if not more. I don't know how many it takes to get you banned from the YMCA, or whether they have some sort of banning agreement with the mall, which I doubt. But I think we have yet more to come. Phyllis Smith, to return to the Washington Post story, who was 18 when she began working at Brooks, a clothing store geared toward young women, because of course Roy Moore would be in there, said teenage girls counseled each other to, quote, just make yourself scarce when Roy's in here. He's just here to bother you. Don't pay attention to him and he'll go away. That's the advice, I guess. And why would anybody pay attention to him in a young women's clothing store anyway? There's nothing we can sell you, sir. The encounters described by the women occurred between 1977 and 1982, when Moore was single, in his early 30s, and an attorney in Etowah County in northeastern Alabama. In October 1977, he was appointed deputy district attorney. In all, the Post spoke to a dozen people who worked at the mall or hung out there as teenagers during the late 1970s and early 80s, and recall Moore as a frequent presence, a well-dressed man walking around alone, leaning on counters, spending enough time in the stores, especially on weekend nights, that some of the young women who worked there said they became uncomfortable. Several of the women said they decided to share their accounts after reading a Post story last week in which 4 women said Moore pursued them as teenagers, including one who said she was 14 and Moore was 32 when he touched her sexually. Since that story was published, another woman, Beverly Young Nelson, appearing with lawyer Gloria Allred, accused Moore of sexually assaulting her in his car when she was 16. A lawyer for Moore's campaign held a news conference on Wednesday to dispute Nelson's account, suggesting that a signature in her yearbook she said was Moore's might have been forged. And by the way, if you saw that lawyer, my goodness, he made an appearance on CNN yesterday, I think, or perhaps the day before, which itself went viral because, I mean, 1, I can't believe he passed the bar anywhere. 2, this dope, he's on television. He's being interviewed by 2 reporters from CNN, including Ali Velshi. Is that right? Is that his name? And you likely heard it. And if you didn't, maybe we can grab the thing. But rather than actually defending Moore in any of this, he went on to question Velshi's background, like, oh, his name's Ali Velshi. Well, I read a little bit about your background. It's really cool. He's trying to like pass it off as I'm not, I don't know what that's supposed to be, but that's, you know what that is? Well, let me tell you what he said in case you missed it. But he says, I read about your background. It's really cool that you so multicultural and come from such spent so much time in so many other interesting countries. And you're brown, essentially, is what he's trying to say here, which was amazing and stunned everybody. And they called him out on it. And it was would be embarrassing to anybody who was normal, of course. But he basically tried to deflect the Moore allegations by saying, ain't you an Arab boy? And they shut him down pretty quickly. Karen is sending me some notes on this one. Thanks very much, Karen. Rule and Velshi at MSNBC. I'm sorry. Okay, I thought it was CNN. So thanks for the correction there. And it was really rather amazing to watch. And what was going on there, I characterized this way. That was basically this lawyer trying to pull the "you ain't from around here, are you, boy?" routine, although Bill in Portland, Maine corrects me and says it really should be "you ain't from around here, is you, boy?" I'm not really sure about that necessarily. I want to say the man may be educated. I don't know. Ain't a word, because ain't in the dictionary, as they used to tell me when I was a kid. P.S. ain't was in the dictionary, and I think always has been. But anyway, it sounded like it was the word of the year back then. That's what they were trying to do. But I mean, if you try to pull that stunt and you actually ain't around there, if you're calling in from, in this case, I think it was St. Petersburg, Florida, which was a little odd, but maybe he was, I don't know, whatever. He was calling in from St. Petersburg and defending him. If you ain't where you are implying the other person ain't from, it doesn't work very well. You were on MSNBC's turf and they shut you down pretty quickly, but you could see exactly what was going on there, and that's what made the thing go viral. Anyway, where were we with this one? Oh yeah, so Nelson's account was disputed. Beverly, remember her? She's the one with the signature in the yearbook, and the lawyer had his doubts about that one. Moore has denied engaging in any kind of sexual misconduct. In an interview with Sean Hannity, we know all about that one. He denies everything, doesn't generally recall any of it. Moore has brushed off mounting calls from Republican leaders in Washington to end his campaign, saying the media and the GOP establishment are aligned against him. The reaction in Alabama among voters and elected officials has been more mixed. President Trump has not gone as far as other Republican leaders, saying through his press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, that Moore should drop out if the allegations are true. Trump ignored questions Wednesday from reporters asking if Moore should quit the race. The sprawling Gadsden Mall, as we know from previous reporting, opened in 1974, with Sears on one end, Pittett's department store at the other, a movie theater in the middle, and plenty of parking all around. It quickly became a social hub for teenagers. By 1977, Moore had returned home from law school after attending the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and serving in Vietnam. It's a good start, right? It was around that time people say that he became a regular at the mall. And I was thinking about that, by the way. I wonder whether his time at the military academy and then in Vietnam, like if you were psychoanalyzing the guy. And I'm not able to do that. I am not a psychoanalyst. And if I was one, I wouldn't be able to do it without talking to him. But I did wonder whether, if you're looking for some kind of, if not an excuse, but some sort of reasoning behind, well, how did you come to this point? I wonder whether he felt like he missed out on his teen years or his childhood and was just kind of trying to recapture that. Like, I could see where you might feel like you had lost years being wrapped up like that in the military and coming back and basically trying to date women who were the age of the women and girls you wanted to date when you preempted your life and went military. I don't know what to make of that. I don't know whether that's something to be sympathetic with. I'm just saying, I wonder if that explains any of it. I'm sure it's people who are psychoanalysts would at least be able to explain the theory behind it better than I can. Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting thought. Thought I'd throw it in there. By 1977, he's now back after law school and Vietnam and hanging out at the mall. It would always be on Friday or Saturday night, says Becky Gray, who was then 22 and working in the men's department of Pittett's. Parents would drop kids off, let them roam the mall, etc. Well, he started coming up to me. She says Moore kept asking her out, and she kept saying no. I'd always say no. I'm dating someone. No, I'm in a relationship, says Gray, now 62, a retired teacher and a Democrat, oh my God, who supports Moore's opponent in the Senate race. Hooray! I thought he was old at that time. Anyone over 22 was just old. Well, okay. Insult us all. But she's 62. She knows what she's saying. Gray says he was persistent in a way that made her uncomfortable. She says he lingered in her section or else by the bathroom area. Ugh. And that she became so disturbed that she complained to the Pittett's manager, Maynard von Spiegelfeld. That's a real name, everybody. Wow. Okay. Maynard von Spiegel. I don't mean to make fun of you, sir, but, he's dead too. That's pretty sad. Okay. I apologize to his estate and living relatives. Gray says he told her that it was, quote, not the first time he had a complaint about him hanging out at the mall. Von Spiegelfeld has since died, according to a relative. Pittett's is also where Deason told the Post last week that Moore asked her out when she was 18 and working behind the jewelry counter. Beyond Pittett's was a long corridor of shops, including Brooks, which sold rabbit fur coats and fashion geared toward young women. That was the fashion at the time. Smith, the one-time Brooks employee, says she was probably 19 when Moore began coming into the store, which she says employed many teenage girls. She remembers him being alone and had the strong impression he wasn't looking to shop for clothing, I guess. I can remember him walking in and the whole mood would change with us girls. Oh, you can just feel the disappointment here. That's according to Smith, 59, who lives in Gadsden and says she, too, is a Democrat. I would be like we were on guard. I would find something else to do. I remember being creeped out. Smith says Moore never approached her personally, but she saw him chatting with other young clerks. Now, by the way, she is a Democrat. She had every opportunity to claim, probably very credibly, that he had, in fact, approached and harassed her, but she had turned him down and nothing happened. It will be a very safe lie to tell, but she doesn't tell it. She tells what she believes is the truth about what generally was the feeling and what she really experienced. She absolutely could have gotten away with that one. Just pointing that out. He never approached her personally, but she saw him chatting with other young clerks and that she would tell new hires to watch out for this guy. She says that occasionally one of the store managers would have to deal with bounced checks, which meant going to the district attorney's office where Moore worked. She says the managers would draw sticks to try to decide who had to go talk to him about the cases. It was just sort of a dreadful experience, she says. So, by the way, Law and Order going to hell in Gadsden, Alabama in the late 70s and early 80s because it was so creepy and overwhelmingly disgusting to have to go and file a case against actual shoplifters, criminals, bad check floaters, what have you, at the Gadsden Mall because you had to talk to Roy Moore about it. Not a good sign. And not a good sign for somebody who's going to run on Law and Order. I'm a DA. I'm a judge. I was screwing with the criminal justice system. Crimes weren't getting reported because people were too disgusted to talk to me. At the center of the mall was a photo booth where Wendy Miller earlier told the Post her mother worked. Miller said she hung out there with her mom when she was 16 and that Moore repeatedly asked her out on dates, which her mother forbade. Miller's mother, Martha Brackett, confirmed her account. Yeah, very interesting. Very quaint, too, by the way, to have a manned, or in this case, womaned photo booth. Well, we don't go in for much of that anymore. Everything's automated. They're stealing all the photo booth jobs, the robots are. At the other end of the mall was Sears, where Richardson says she was among a clique of Gadsden High girls who worked at the store during their senior year. Richardson, whose maiden name is Burgess, was assigned to the men's section, and her friends and classmate McLaughlin worked in the cosmetics and jewelry counter at the front of the store with a view down the long mall corridor. Now we get a sense of why the layout of the mall is important. I could see when he came in, says McLaughlin, whose maiden name was Shirley, and who says that she and Richardson usually worked evening shifts on the weekends. He didn't really talk to me. He was over there visiting with Gina a lot, and that got to be a pattern, and it's patterns that worry us. McLaughlin said she told her friend to stay away from Moore. I hate to say this, but Gina was like my little sister. She was raised by a Southern Baptist preacher and a little naive. So I'd let her know, here he comes. When Richardson met Moore, she says he introduced himself as an attorney and says she found it odd that she was asked to call him Roy. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. I hope we didn't, we may have gotten cut off on our way out to the break that's a non-break, but I think you get the idea of what was going on. I probably should have just left off after noting that Gina was like the little sister here and that she'd get a warning from the people at the front counters in Sears. They could see down the hallway, here comes Roy Moore, everybody hide. Okay, well, oops, we almost got the music correctly cut off there, but okay, so where were we in our reading of the Washington Post's explication of two more women accusers? There was the warning, and Richardson's feeling that it was so odd that Mr. Attorney here asked her to call him Roy. That was strange in the first place because of the way we were always taught to call someone Mr. or Mrs., she says. In other words, she thought of him as a adult out of her age range. When he asked for her number, she says that she told him, no, my dad is so strict. No. She and McLaughlin, I wonder why her dad was so strict. There was a child predator running around town. Maybe that was it. Of course, the implication is, and this is interesting, the implication is that he's a Southern Baptist minister and therefore strict. And that could be the case. But I think it's probably also worth noting that there was, in fact, a child predator running around town at the time, and it might not have been the safest thing in the world to allow your daughters to accept dates from just anyone. I don't know. There's no indication that she was specifically warned, let's say, not to deal with Roy Moore, but, you never know what people were talking about in Gadsden in those days. All right, so let's see. A few days later, Richardson says she was called out of her trigonometry class. Okay, so yeah, that's it. I guess that does overlap with our AL story, so maybe we're only on accuser number 8 here. At that point, he said, oh, yes, right, this was called her out of the trigonometry class. Richardson says she was startled, thinking maybe her dad was calling, and that's an extra detail we didn't get from before. And that when she realized it was Moore, I felt like every person in that office was staring at me, because almost certainly, I think we're right there, he must have said that he was calling from the district attorney's office in order to get people in the office to page her to pick up the phone, because otherwise it's just, you can't just call and say, I'm not telling you who it is. Anyway, at that point, he said, would you like to go out sometime? Recalls Richardson, says she described the call right afterward to McLaughlin, who confirmed the account. I said, well, I can't talk right now. And being so naive and not so worldly, I said, I'll be at work Friday or Saturday. Oh. So that'll be taken as an invitation, obviously. The next Friday or Saturday night, she says, he came into Sears and asked her out again, and she told him again, look, my dad is so strict. She recalls Moore suggesting that they meet for a late movie after she got off work. She says she called her parents and told them she was going out with friends. Unwise. Instead, she says she met Moore at the movie theater. She says she can't remember what they saw, but she remembers clearly what happened after. She says it was cold, and Moore offered to drive her to her car, which was more than a football field's distance away in the parking area behind Sears. She says he parked by her car and began chatting with her, and she says she told him again about her dad. I just explained to him that my dad's a minister, and, I just can't sneak around because that's wrong, she recalls. So I thanked him and started to get out, and he grabbed me and pulled me in, and that's when he kissed me. It was a man kiss, like, and this is what it says in the paper, dudes, like really deep tongue. I know you didn't want to hear that. I'm sorry about that. Hopefully you're listening via podcast in the afternoon after you've had lunch, maybe, an hour or two after you've been able to digest. Like very forceful tongue. That was a surprise. I'd never been kissed like that, she says. And the minute that happened, I got scared then. I really did. Something came over me that scared me. And so I said, I've got to go because my curfew is now. She says she got out of the car and into her own. Thankfully, she was able to just get away from that. Richardson and McLaughlin say they talked about it afterwards, and when Moore came into Sears after that, McLaughlin would warn her friend so she could hide in the back of the store. Imagine getting fired for hiding from your job, by the way. That didn't happen, I don't think, but look what she has to do. I would call and say, he's coming this way, McLaughlin said. She would go to the back. She was uncomfortable. She was frightened is what was happening. Richardson says she never spoke to Moore again. She successfully hid from him, I guess. She says she first told her father about the incident on Wednesday. Wow. She said she never told her mother, who's deceased. All these years I thought that was an isolated incident, Richardson says. Now, as a mother and a grandmother, it just makes me physically sick. I realize it didn't just happen to me. Which, I guess, again, part of the importance of speaking up, though it's very hard to just say, well, that's on you now, kids. You take care of the law enforcement in this town since Mr. District Attorney won't. Well, that's the end of the Washington Post entry on this. There's still more. We've already done an hour on Roy Moore. That's more than enough. But there's more to the story. I did not set aside the exchange between Moore's lawyer and Ali Velshi. But I think you'll get the idea. We'll see if I can't scrounge that up, and rather than play it on the air, perhaps maybe provide it to you in the roundup. There's more discussion of the Moore topic. I'm reluctant to keep going, but I keep setting this thing aside and saying we'll discuss it tomorrow when surely there will be less Moore news to discuss. It just doesn't look like there's ever going to be any less. So, 2 topics of discussion that we haven't touched on yet. First, Kayla Moore, his wife, at some point in the last couple of days, came out with a letter of support from I think the original number was 53 pastors in and around Alabama, I guess testifying to the strong Christian character of Roy Moore. And we discussed it. I mean, that it had been brought up a couple of days ago when we were talking about the things in the context of what will Republicans in the Senate do if Roy Moore can't get off the ballot, doesn't drop out of the race, and is in fact elected to the United States Senate. And there's still more to talk about on that front too. And I thought it might be interesting, let's say, to either to take the suggestion of the lawyer from the University of Alabama Law School, the professor who suggested that they might suspend his swearing in order to investigate his fitness for the office and whether or not they would then expel him from the Senate. And, of course, we were surprised to find out that there was somebody who thought you could simply suspend a swearing in. I'll spare you any more details about that at the moment. But that came up, and I thought it might be interesting to, in those hearings, call these 53 pastors as witnesses. Not so much because I'm interested in what they have to say, although now I would be interested. Even then, I guess, even before this next story, I would be interested just to hear them come and try and justify their faith in Roy Moore, although really I was more interested in dragging out the hearings as long as possible. Might as well keep the story alive, and the longer the hearings are going on, and it would be very difficult. I mean, they could obviously steamroller you with partisan votes in the committee, but it would be difficult for them to justify, or uncomfortable briefly, for them to justify voting against listening to what pastors who support Roy Moore have to say. But I just want the hearings to go on and on and on so that it stays in the news and the guy is not sworn in into the Senate. But anyway, I don't need to address that anymore, or at least not all of it. Although now I'm even more interested in hearing from the pastors because there's a story going on about that. And this one reported also by AL.com. This time our writer is, let's see, we'll scroll down here. Leda Gore, Leada. I don't know if she says Leada. Leda Gore reports Kayla Moore posts support from 50 pastors. That letter posted on Facebook. 4 ask for their names to be removed. What? That seems like an interesting angle on the story. Let's take a look at that. Kayla Moore, wife of Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore, shared a letter on Facebook over the weekend indicating support from more than 50 Alabama pastors. Not all the pastors said they gave permission for their name to be used on what appears to be a recycled letter from before the GOP primary, however. In other words, this is a fake. What's going on here is she took an endorsement letter that 50-something pastors signed in support of Roy Moore before these allegations came out and recycled it so that it looked like a new story with these 50 pastors expressing their support for him despite the stories having come out. She's forging it. Maybe that's why they think the signature in the yearbook is forged. They are forging letters. Another projection story. How coincidental is that? Sexual predators and more projection and a weird crisscrossing of sexually predatory behavior and misogyny and sexual abuse crisscrossing with alt-right politics. Weird. Who would have guessed? Oh, you would have, because you know it's all a sex cult. Moore's wife, Kayla, posted the letter on her Facebook page Sunday after days of controversy surrounding her husband and allegations he had sexual contact with a 14-year-old in 1979 when he was 32 years old. 3 other women said Moore pursued them as teenagers. We're up to at least 8 now. The letter was posted before a 5th woman, Beverly Young Nelson, came forward with additional charges on Monday. And, of course, numbers 6, 7, and 8, and maybe 9, plus some additional witnesses who may not have been among the original 30 cited in the Washington Post story. Moore denies the charges. In their letter, the pastors said Moore was an immovable rock in the culture wars, which is good reason not to elect him, and has met attacks with a rare, unconquerable resolve. Someone's a wordsmith, eh? It's no wonder the Washington establishment has declared all-out war on his campaign, the letter notes before urging voters to cast their ballot for Moore, who faces Democrat Doug Jones in the December 12th election. After the letter was published on AL.com, Tiwana Adetunji, there you are, Tiwana Adetunji of the Fresh Anointing House of Worship in Montgomery, said she was not contacted about the letter and did not give permission for her name or that of her husband, Bishop Fred Adetunji, to be used. I was not asked about this story or allegations, Adetunji said, so I don't know whether he was even a signatory of the original letter. I'm not clear on that, but he certainly, she and her husband both did not want their name used in a letter that made it appear that they were excusing the allegations. The letter appears to be a version of one already posted on Moore's campaign website. That letter, posted prior to the primary, contains all the same wording as below, but with 3 extra paragraphs at the top, including a sentence referencing the August 15th vote. So there was more in there, and it was obviously geared toward the primary, and they cut that out and pretended that it was a new letter. Amazing. Pastor Thad Endicott said he was not contacted about the most recent post from Kayla Moore. The list that has recently circulated was evidently copied and pasted from the August endorsements without checking to see if I still endorsed Moore, said Endicott. Endicott, pastor of the Heritage Baptist Church, asked that his name be removed from the Moore endorsement. A pastor from Middle Tennessee said he was never asked to sign the original letter. Dr. George Grant of Parish Presbyterian Church in Franklin, Tennessee, told WSMV he hadn't had contact with Moore personally in a decade and hadn't spoken to the Senate nominee's campaign since before the election. Grant said he has no desire to play a role in Alabama politics. Not my state, not my issues, he told the news channel. Moore's campaign did not respond to questions related to the letter or why it was posted with the date and identifying information removed. At least one of the pastors listed as supporting Moore is no longer at the church listed on the letter. The text of the letter posted on Facebook and its signatures are below. You can take a look at it there. We'll include a link to this. Screenshots show the letter posted by Kayla Moore in the original from Roy Moore's website. For decades, Roy Moore has been... this is the letter. Okay. I don't know. Do we really need to peruse it? I don't think so. It's not a long letter. It is a long list of names, and there's no reason for us to read them there. We will include that in the roundup. But how do you like that? Essentially forging a letter of support and then forging it again to make it look like it was reissued in light of these allegations, which is really pretty amazing. I think it first came to my attention via Twitter by a tweet from someone who, I guess their actual Twitter handle, #Griswold, that's pretty funny in light of our Griswold discussion yesterday, who now has in his username or his screen name there as banned from the Gadsden Mall. Who is #Griswold? It's a verified account, so I'm curious. Reporter with the Free Beacon. Oh, it's interesting. Very, well, interesting too. That's what it says. Reporter at the Free Beacon. Who knows if that's true, because the next thing says defendant in Griswold v. Connecticut. I doubt that that's the case. Preferred pronouns, thou and thine. Okay, but the Free Beacon is one of those creepy right to alt-right publications that should never be trusted for any reason. But they are slowly, one by one, peeling off from the Roy Moore campaign. Even Breitbart is getting ready to drop their connections with him, but they're still viciously attacking the accusers. Anyway, his tweet was the one that said, so it looks like a lot of that letter of 50 pastors supporting Roy Moore following the allegations was invented by Moore's wife. It may turn out to be that I'd be very interested if there was some follow-up on that, and it turned out that none of them had ever signed the original letter either. What a bunch of weirdos. Anyway, moving on with still more to do about Moore, believe it or not. I saw another tweet this morning, and it was directed to me by several of you who are listeners to the show. I refer here to the tweet of John Harwood. John Harwood, another verified account, covering Washington for CNBC. And the tweet reads, Alabama update, convinced neither Moore nor any write-in can win. Republicans now trying to persuade Senator Strange, get this theory. They want Luther Strange to resign now on the theory that it would create a vacancy, derivative of the Sessions vacancy, and trigger a new do-over election. Legally dubious, but hoping for a friendly federal judge. Do you see what they're trying to do here? There's already, of course, a special election scheduled. When Sessions resigned in order to take up the post of Attorney General, which he didn't deserve, and he does deserve impeachment from because of his perjury on his way there, plus his obstruction of justice, yada, yada. When he resigned, that's when a vacancy was created. The governor of Alabama responds to the vacancy by appointing Luther Strange to the seat and setting a date for a special election. That's where we are now. This new theory is if Strange were to resign, the governor of Alabama would then have another vacancy to fill. And according to Alabama law, and we'd have to read it to see whether this is really the case, but ordinarily, with just one vacancy, it would leave it to the Alabama governor to either set a date for a special election or opt to pass on setting such a date if a general election were approaching soon enough that they say maybe there's no need for a special election. If there's a upcoming general election, we'll just use that as the vehicle and our appointee will fill the seat in the meantime. It's very rare in modern times for the appointee to fill out a term, or at least part of a still valid term from created by, where a vacancy has been created. It's very rare for that interim appointee to resign as well. Depending on the language of the Alabama statute, it is possible that every vacancy creates in the governor the power, the option anyway, to name a replacement, name an interim replacement, and set the date for a special election. I'm not sure. I guess if they set the date for a special election after the current date for a special election, I guess that would offer them the opportunity. The theory is that it would offer them the opportunity to go through with the December special election, accidentally elect Roy Moore, possibly, or see the election of Doug Jones, and then what the hell would they do? Then they would have I guess they could theoretically then try to cancel the December election. If they weren't able to cancel the December election, are they saying that they would, if Moore were elected, but I don't know. I'm not exactly sure how how do they create the second vacancy? I don't know. It's a very dodgy plan to begin with. And Moore, if he were to stay in the race, could presumably foil it by, if he were to win the election, I guess at that point it would then fall to the governor and Secretary of State to issue his election credentials and send them to Congress in the hopes that he resigns or is expelled, and then but then you'd have another vacancy. I don't know. It could very well be that there's limitations in the Alabama statute that says, well, if there's already a special election scheduled, then you don't have that authority to schedule a second special election. I don't know. It's very weird, very dumb, and very dubious, but they're looking for a favorable ruling from a friendly federal judge. And they might have gotten one, too, if that wacko Brent Talley, or what's his name? Is it Brent or Brock? The paranormal investigator who has never practiced law. He's pending nomination to the Alabama courts. I don't know if he's from that district, but that gives you an idea of the kind of stupid things that the Trump administration and anybody else would be able to pull off in the future if they got friendly judges that would just allow them to do anything. All right, I got to scroll back down and pick up on some of the comments that have come in here. Jingy, not particularly happy. He hasn't had his lunch yet. And thanks for the lurid detail on Moore's tongue. I know, I'm sorry about that. You're going to have to blame the Washington Post for that one. Let's see. Athena said, don't you think there's some sort of breach using your public office to get dates? Absolutely. That's why we brought it up. And, he's really trying to, I think in the case of calling the school, he almost certainly did leverage his office to get that done. And that's rather sick. Let's see. Michael Musson noting that Moore's lawyer had the Richard Spencer party on the right haircut. Is that right? He did have a kind of a weird look, no doubt about that. Lots of continuing commentary from our friend Chief Beef Loco. I don't know if I can I read all of this? I don't know if I can get all this in. It's always long-term comments there. All right, I think we're sort of done with Moore. I don't know if there's anything else we need to add to it. There's probably been some late-breaking developments. I know there was commentary earlier about how crazy... Oh, yes, David Paquette had sent us this humorous take on all of this. Solving all Trump/GOP problems while satisfying everyone. Strange resigns from the Senate. Sessions takes his place. Jared becomes Attorney General. Moore marries Ivanka and takes over Middle East peace. And Strange goes back to Alabama to leer at teen girls at the mall. Done. An excellent solution. No doubt about it. Well worth considering. And that one goes out to all of you. You can read that one for yourselves. I love the part. Moore marries Ivanka. She's a little old for him, but it might just work out. Okay. Let's see. What have we here? I guess we'll report this one. This is one of the dangers of the rash of accusations of sexual harassment. The Hill, reported by Rebecca Savransky, says woman accuses Al Franken of kissing, groping her without consent. And it is being tweeted out along with a rather odd photograph of, what are we even looking at here? I don't know. I cannot even tell you what's happening in this picture, except, it looks like Al Franken, pantomiming, grabbing the breasts of a woman who's got her eyes closed and is seated in a chair and wearing body armor and a military-style helmet with her name on it. I don't know whether that's the uniform of an actual service member or, I don't know what I was going to say, Halloween costuming of some kind, because there are others in similar garb, but the only thing you can see is part of the face of one other person who's got, I don't know, sunglasses and a red beret perhaps on. And it looks like costuming. I don't know what's going on here. Let's find out if the story tells us anything. I guess this is breaking-ish news for us. A TV host and sports broadcaster accusing Senator Al Franken of kissing and groping her without consent. It actually reads, a TV host and sports broadcaster accusing Senator Al Franken of kissing and groping he without her consent. I assume that's supposed to be her, and that there's supposed to be the word is before accusing. Leanne Tweeden wrote Thursday in a piece on KABC that in December of 2006, she was on a USO tour to entertain our troops. Okay. She accused Franken of groping her without her consent when she was, quote, asleep. I would love to know what's going on here. It wasn't until I was back in the U.S. and looking through the CD of photos we were given by the photographer that I saw this one, she said, including a photo. I felt violated all over again, embarrassed, belittled, humiliated, she wrote. How dare anyone grab my breast like this and think it's funny? Well, if that's what's happening there, I guess I can't tell you any different. How dare anyone grab your breasts and think it's funny? Although I'm a little bit confused about this. It wasn't until I was back in the U.S. and looking through the CD of photos that I saw this one. I felt violated. Did he grab her or not? I can't tell from the picture. it looks like he's not yet in contact, but maybe he is. And she wakes up from that and realizes what he's doing. The only way I can make sense of it is if she in fact realizes what he's doing right then and there, and then only once back in the United States and seeing the photographs is she embarrassed all over again. Otherwise, I don't understand the all over again part, but I guess, this is, first of all, this is what the right's been waiting for. A way for the political right to level an accusation against a sitting Democratic official and then call Democrats hypocrites for not calling for his ouster. So that's where we are, and we knew that this was going to happen. It's just that they finally found a living, serving Democrat to pin this one on. And, we'll see what kind of commentary comes from this and what sort of comment Al Franken makes about this, if any. And, we knew this was coming, so let's decide. We'll be right back after this. Well, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and it looks like it's already getting worse and worse on the other front of our story. We're gonna, it's time to discuss these things. I don't think I have any particular responsibility to jump out and answer this before Al Franken does, but caught us a little bit by surprise. But I guess if it was coming from anywhere, what do you think? You think it's predictable that it would have come out on a senator with an entertainment background because Hollywood and blah, blah, blah? I don't know. You tell me. There's a little bit of that in there. Kate Sherrill tells me, by the way, that the photo I was looking at is, in fact, of his accuser asleep on the plane home from their USO tour. It didn't immediately strike me as a photograph that had been taken on a plane because, of course, I'm used to commercial airliners as a plane setting. But if you're flying back on a military transport aircraft, it might very well look something like that. Although it looked like the electrical shack of a military base, but it's a different look inside of these military planes. And I guess traveling in headgear and body armor would have been standard procedure at the time. I don't know what to tell you about that. And anyway, there's more. And so I've got Tegan Goddard's Political Wire on this one, has a little bit more information relying on KABC's report. Franken also accused of kissing this woman without her consent. Leanne Tweeden writes that she was kissed and groped by Senator Al Franken on a USO tour in 2006. This excerpt from the KABC report says, he repeated that actors really need to rehearse everything. This is where the entertainment part comes in. And that we must practice the kiss. I guess that was part of their show. I said, okay, so he would stop badgering me. We did the line leading up to the kiss, and when he came at me, he put his hand on the back of my head, mashed his lips against mine, and aggressively, stuck his tongue in my mouth. That is probably not going to be a necessary part of a stage show. I immediately pushed him away with both my hands against his chest and told him if he ever did that to me again, I wouldn't be so nice about it the next time. I walked away. All I could think about was getting to the bathroom as fast as possible to rinse the taste of him out of my mouth. Yuck. Well, that's not good. And now the question becomes whether or not, if this is true, and I guess this is at least in the early stage of the accusations, you can still get away with saying if true. But I think the window on that closes within a couple of hours these days. But now people saying, okay, if this is true, or some people just jumping right to, okay, this is it. Franken has to go. So here's the question. Is it something that you can make apologies for and stay in office, or is it something that you absolutely have to literally go and you're chucked out of the Senate? Or would he be able to sit there and vote on the expulsion motion that's going on? I don't know. In the meantime, there's still more. Now we have, some of the right, before they got a hold of I guess they didn't get a hold of the Al Franken allegations just yet. So they're stuck on Jerry Seinfeld dating a 17-year-old when he was 39. And that was kind of yucky and all that, but I don't know whether we need to say anything about Jerry Seinfeld, because who cares? Jerry Seinfeld, what are we supposed to do about that? Well, on the Al Franken front, I guess we're going to have to. So, open question now. Exactly what do we have to do? And now, I mean, this is interesting because this opens a whole new can of worms. I am sure that there are more sexual predators in Congress. I think we know that. I mean, reports over the last couple of days about sexual harassment in Congress by members has been pretty prominent. So, this is going to spread. And I guess the question is, do we take the cases as they come? Do we open up the doors and say, let's get all of the accusations on the table here right now and take care of everybody all at once? I don't know. I don't think there's any other way you can do it. I think you have to take the accusations as they come. And I'd like to know what Al Franken has to say about this thing. But, yeah, it's going to make things difficult. So that's bad news. And, well, we're just going to have to chuck everybody out the window one by one, I suppose, as these things happen. Let's see. I don't know who is, I'm curious. Oh, Leanne Tweeden is the morning anchor of KABC Radio. Is that right? Let's take a look. She's got a Twitter handle there too. Yeah. Wow. She's got big hair. All right. Well, Roy Moore might have liked that, but, he didn't get a chance. This is going to damage everybody, involved. Not her. Although, who knows? I mean, I guess there'll be people who attack her, but hopefully fewer of them coming from the Democratic side of the aisle than we frequently see happen with Republicans. Okay, well, looks like there's going to have to be a reckoning on that one. And, well, I don't know. What do we say? We say good, I guess, and say, now, I suppose the things you can do with this is demonstrate either what you intend to do with everybody else or what. But, well, one by one, I guess we'll deal with these things. Daniel Dale, for instance, tweeting, it's not clear from the photo if Franken was actually touching Tweeden or if he was pretending to do so while coming very close to do it, which is not much of a defense. And I think that's probably right. I don't know whether he did touch her. I hope not. But he's clearly mugging for the camera, and it's pretty clear that that's supposed to mean he thinks this is a funny thing to do. And it's not. So that's going to, create some problems. What can you do? Okay, I guess you're going to have to let the chips fall where they may. I just hope that we get to all the chips. And I'm hopeful that this will encourage other people to say, okay, I've been holding it in about somebody else here, and I might as well get it all on the table. As long as everybody else is doing it, I will take some courage and do it too. And I guess if it empties out the Democratic side of the aisle entirely and leaves the Republicans standing, that's just where the chips fall. And we now head back to the polls and try and fix this thing and find people that don't do this stuff to stand for public office. It's too bad. A lot of good things were being done, but no more. Okay. I guess that's where I'm going to have to come down on it. All right. There are other stories, really, seriously. And this is not the reason I'm trying to get off of this story now. I've been trying to do that for an hour, but let's see what else we need to pitch in order to stay up to date on the other things happening today. Let's see. There is more Trump-Russia stories, and I think since we may only fit one or two in here, I'm going to go with this one. Natasha Bertrand, writing for Business Insider. This one, I think, had the most intriguing of the headlines available to us. The dossier author, Christopher Steele, is talking. And he talks to Business Insider here, I guess. Trump's hotel and land deals with Russians need to be examined. That's the headline on Natasha Bertrand's piece. There are some subheader bullet points that we might as well read out in case we get sidetracked. We want to get the main idea across. Christopher Steele, the former British intelligence officer who wrote the explosive dossier alleging ties between Donald Trump and Russia, NP, told The Guardian's Luke Harding last year that Trump's land and hotel deals with Russians needed to be examined. Steele did not go into further detail, Harding said, but seemed to be referring to a 2008 home sale to the Russian oligarch Dmitry Rybolovlev. Remember him? Rybolovlev. I think we're talking about the sale of that decrepit mansion that in Palm Beach that was eventually torn down. Remember, it was sold for like $95 million or something. And Dmitry Rybolovlev is the one whose plane keeps coincidentally landing next to Trump's plane during the campaign. Richard Dearlove, who headed the UK Foreign Intelligence Unit MI6 between 1999 and 2004, said in April that Trump borrowed money from Russia for his business during the 2008 financial crisis. So now we're getting at why this is back in the news if Chris Steele actually spoke to the Guardian last year. Longtime British intelligence officer who last year wrote the collection of memos alleging deep ties between President Donald Trump and the Kremlin, told a reporter in December that investigators examining such connections needed to, quote, to look at the contracts for the hotel deals and land deals that Trump had pursued with Russian nationals. That's funny. That's what I say. Check their values against the money Trump secured via loans, the former intelligence officer Christopher Steele told The Guardian's Luke Harding. Why didn't we read this back in December? The difference is what's important. Maybe it wasn't until now that The Guardian has been able to publish. I don't know. Well, maybe this will explain it. Harding, The Guardian's former Moscow bureau chief, described his conversations with Steele in his new book, Collusion, Secret Meetings, Dirty Money, and How Russia Helped Donald Trump Win. This may be the book we actually need to read. Steele did not go into further detail, Harding said, but seemed to be referring to a 2008 home sale to the Russian oligarch Dmitry Rybolovlev that has come under scrutiny by the special counsel Robert Mueller. Mueller is investigating Russia's meddling in the 2016 U.S. election, including whether the Trump campaign colluded with Russia to influence the outcome. As part of that, he's examining Russian purchases of apartments in Trump buildings, Bloomberg has reported. I know he's investigating everything, but it is nice to see that he is on the case with respect to some of the things that we spent so much time emphasizing on the show. I did think they were important, and it looks like Mueller thinks so too. Rybolovlev, a multi-billionaire who was an early investor in one of the world's most lucrative fertilizer companies, bought a Palm Beach property from Trump for $95 million in 2008, 2 years after Trump put it on the market for $125 million. Trump had purchased it for $41 million in 2004. Rybolovlev has never lived in the mansion and since had it torn down, but an advisor, Sergei Chernitsyn, told Business Insider earlier this year that there was every prospect that this investment will turn out to be profitable. Okay. Rybolovlev's cash infusion into Trump's bank account is believed to be the most expensive home sale in U.S. history. How odd that it would coincidentally fall to Donald Trump. According to PolitiFact, 2008 was the year Trump Entertainment Resorts missed a $53.1 million bond interest payment and later filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection to reorganize. Richard Dearlove, who headed the UK Foreign Intelligence Unit MI6 between 1999 and 2004, told Prospect magazine in April that Trump borrowed money from Russia for his business during the 2008 financial crisis. What lingers for Trump may be what deals on what terms he did after the what deals and on what terms he did after the financial crisis of 2008 to borrow Russian money when other banks would not loan to him, Dearlove said. Now we're talking. Okay. Let's see. Is this another article or just advertising another article? I can't tell what this is. There's a headline-ish line here that says Steele assessed his work on the Trump dossier was 70 to 90% accurate. I don't know whether that's part of this story or teasing another complete story or what. By 2008, the story appears to continue, all the big banks were highly reluctant to loan to Trump, who had lost them money. Trump acknowledged in his 2007 book, Think Big, Make It Happen in Business and Life. Anyway, I figured it was the bank's problem, not mine, Trump wrote, according to the New York Times. What the hell did I care? I actually told one bank. I told you you shouldn't have loaned me that money. I told you the goddamn deal was no good. What kind of, I don't even know what the hell he's thinking he's going to do with this statement. But okay, that's what it says. You're right. No one should lend you money. Rybolovlev and Trump have insisted that they never met during the Palm Beach home transaction. That sometimes happens among these weirdo elites. The Rybolovlev family trust did acquire a property in Palm Beach from Mr. Trump back in 2008 below the asking price as an investment and following a process of negotiation, Chernitsyn said. Throughout the process of the trust's purchase, Mr. Rybolovlev had no personal contact with Mr. Trump. Still, the question on Steele's mind in early 2016, when he partnered with the opposition research firm Fusion GPS, based in Washington, D.C., to examine Trump's ties to Russia, was whether Trump was indebted to or being blackmailed by Russia when he launched his presidential campaign in 2015. In June 2016, Steele asked his sources in Moscow, developed throughout his decades working for MI6's Russia desk, for information about Trump. Steele told his friends that what his sources reported back to him was hair-raising, according to Harding. For anyone who reads it, this is a life-changing experience, Steele said at the time, according to Harding. Steele wrote his first memo describing the source's findings for Fusion GPS later that month. It was the first of several Steele wrote for Fusion over the next 5 months that outlined a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia at least 5 years in the making. Steele recognized that no piece of intelligence was 100% right, Harding wrote. According to friends, he assessed his work on the Trump dossier was 70 to 90% accurate. I've been dealing with this country for 30 years, Steele told his friends. Harding wrote, why would I invent this stuff? Indeed, that is a good question. Okay, is there more to this one? No, I believe that is it, so we'll let that one stand for today, and I do think that's probably the most interesting of the many moving pieces still out there. Let's see, other things of interest that will require some mention today. Let's see. I guess as long as we are talking about the various sexual harassment allegations out there against politicians, yesterday was a big day for the Vox people publishing their stories. I guess not their stories of sexual harassment, thankfully, but in particular, the story by Matthew Iglesias that says, yeah, Bill Clinton should have resigned. I wonder how that reads in light of the Al Franken stuff. Because there was a little bit of critique going on about that one, too. Southpaw, for instance, New York City's NYC Southpaw, saying this story does, the piece from Iglesias mentions but doesn't dwell on the fact that congressional Republicans never made their beef with Clinton about sexual harassment. And I definitely saw some good commentary being made by friends of mine on Twitter. There is some strange nuance to all of this. And then the question of, is the country really better off if Bill Clinton resigns during his presidency over the Monica Lewinsky allegations? And that doesn't become until the very end the basis of the impeachment. But should he have resigned at that point? Would we have done better? Does that count? Does the fact that he didn't resign mean that Dems didn't repudiate him? That's a nuanced question as well. And does it set good precedent for what's happening right now with Al Franken? Do we take that to mean that he too should resign at this point? Is that going to be Matthew Iglesias's advice to him? It may very well be. It's just an open question. I think one of the other things we really have to consider here is it really the case? I mean, I know it feels like it's the case, but are we empirically sure or next to sure that it's the case? It's beginning to feel a lot like in these situations, Democrats resign and Republicans try to tough it out. It's not always analogous. I don't know if the David Vitter stuff is analogous to this because we're not talking about kids. Maybe Roy Moore's thing is a separate case altogether. But certainly sexual harassment, very serious, and it may mean that we adopt as a policy that, if this stuff is true and you know it, don't stand there and deny it, resign. But on the other hand, once again, just as I've alleged in the past, there's laws for Democratic presidents and Democratic office holders, and there's nothing for Republicans, because it certainly feels like they seem to tough it out, stay in office, even getting reelected, and Democrats doing what we think everybody ought to do are unilaterally disarming. But on the other hand, it's like, well, if we really believe, and I think we do, that sexual harassment isn't a partisan issue, well, it's not. It may turn out to be unilateral disarmament in the political sphere, but we just don't treat the issue as political. It just happens to have political ramifications. But we do have to keep an eye on that, because what do we do if the upshot of this is Republicans not only get to keep their seats or be reelected or move up in the political system while Democrats step aside? Is the message that comes out of that, does that increase or decrease instances of sexual harassment in the future? Maybe for Democrats it reduces them, but what if it's increasing it for Republicans? Not only can I get away with this, but there's obviously different rules for us versus them. I might as well go out and grope somebody now. I hope that's not really going to be the case, but it's out there. I know that Brian Beutler commented on the Vox piece by saying this on Twitter: it is an important piece, but I would like it even better if it grappled with how politics would look today if the GOP's strategy of running an endless, unscrupulous investigation of a president they didn't like managed to bring him down for conduct unrelated to public service. Although, again, I don't know, in modern context, is that conduct unrelated to public service when we clearly have a public policy issue of institutionalized misogyny where we can debate whether or not important men or any man at all ought to be able to get away with this kind of sexual harassment or what? I mean, that's now a public policy issue we have to address. We appear to have a very sick society here, and we got to do something about it. And we will not have any partners in the Republican Party in doing so. Do we go forward anyway? I think we have to. What does it mean? What kind of society do we get out of it? I mean, does Trumpism fill the vacuum? And if it does, have we done a service or a disservice in purging our ranks of people guilty of this stuff? And I don't know. Short term, it's clearly a disservice. Long term, I don't know. I hope we can cross our fingers and hope that it establishes us as the party that doesn't tolerate this sort of thing. But I mean, what if it doesn't? What if we are still tolerating it and we just end up kneecapping ourselves over and over again while watching things get worse as the vacuum is filled with Trumpism, which likewise makes things worse? I don't know how to work this out, but I guess in the initial stages, well, hopefully we'll find out soon enough what do we do in Minnesota? And what happens to Al Franken, who by all other accounts outside of this is a valuable public servant. But can it matter in the face of something like this? Will it matter what he thought he was doing? Will it matter that he was doing it while he wasn't in office, or I guess was he at that point not even running for office? I can't recall. He was perhaps flirting with the idea. When was he first elected? I can't even remember anymore. Maybe he was on a USO tour. I don't know. Does it matter? Not at this point. I won't even bother to look up when he was elected because I'm not certain that that's going to be relevant to what was going on. So you did it before you were in office. Well, don't do that sort of thing, whether you're in office or not. That has to be the bottom line, right? I think so. All right. Just a few minutes left on a very confusing day. Lots more to discuss. I did mention to you that there's been a lot of discussion of sexual harassment on Capitol Hill. It seems like maybe at this point, that's kind of where I'm going to have to close out the show and put that on the record. CNN reported on this the other day. There was not room to shoehorn it in. There's many other things I want to get to, but this is clearly going to have to be a part of the record for today. Nothing about it felt right. More than 50 people described sexual harassment on Capitol Hill. MJ Lee, Sunlin, looks like I'm going to have some auto-playing video here. Hang on just a second, make sure that it's at least muted. Sunlin Sarafti, Sarah Ghanim, and Juana Summers reporting this for CNN. Women of Congress sharing Me Too stories. Hashtag Me Too stories was the video that wanted to roll. Be extra careful of the male lawmakers who sleep in their offices. They can be trouble. That's how this story starts. I always am wary of the male lawmakers, or really anybody who sleeps in their office. I always thought that was a cheap stunt and rather stupid and didn't actually necessarily save any taxpayer money, since they do have an allocation that they could use for, no, that's not the case. They don't get a housing allowance, but they get paid plenty, although, it is true that maintaining two houses even on $170,000 thing is not necessarily an easy thing to do, depending on what kind of housing you're maintaining back home. And, nobody wants to downsize after winning the election, I'm sure. But, sleeping in your office, that just consumes taxpayer resources at a greater rate, and it doesn't help anybody. It just means you aren't spending out of pocket. It doesn't mean you're protecting taxpayer resources. You're using more of them. And anyway, think about that in the context of the sexual harassment situations where members are harassing their own staffs. If they're sleeping in the office, that creates a kind of a weird situation in a way we hadn't thought about before. Anyway, the story does continue. There's a lot more of it. We'll never get through all of it, but to give you a taste, we'll read you the lead paragraph. Beyond that, avoid finding yourself alone with a congressman or senator in elevators, late night meetings, or events where alcohol is flowing, and think twice about speaking out about sexual harassment from a boss. It could cost you your career. These are a few of the unwritten rules that some female lawmakers, yes, including lawmakers, staff, and interns say they follow on Capitol Hill, where they say harassment and coercion is pervasive on both sides of the rotunda. Interesting enough. You would think that would end with both sides of the aisle, and that may also be true. But here they get to use the phrase both sides of the and throw us a curveball. Rotunda. That means, of course, the rotunda in the middle of the Capitol building that separates the Senate and House wings. It means that both senators and House members are involved in this. There's also the creep list, an informal roster passed along by word of mouth consisting of the male members most notorious for inappropriate behavior, ranging from making sexually suggestive comments or gestures, to seeking physical relations with younger employees and interns. CNN spoke with more than 50 lawmakers, current and former Hill aides, and political veterans who have worked in Congress, the majority of whom spoke anonymously to be candid and avoid potential repercussions. With few exceptions, every person said they have personally experienced sexual harassment on the Hill or know of others who have. So the balance of the story will be there for your edification. And boy, it's going to be a hell of a day tomorrow. We do have a lot more to get to. There are lots of other bits and pieces, moving parts of our political picture that I really meant to have be part of the report. But we won't make it today. Tomorrow is Friday. We sometimes include all of those things in a big roundup for you to get ready for your weekend. And of course, later in the week, we will be into the Thanksgiving holiday, where we might find it helpful to have a pre-recorded show or two on hand, just so that you can, even though you're perhaps traveling, perhaps at home cooking, and I will likely be doing the same. I won't be traveling, but be cooking, and I'll want the day off to spend with family. You'll want the day off to spend with family, but you may also want a fresh podcast to go along with all of that fresh turkey. So we'll see if we can't put one of those together. And maybe I'm always threatening to do one of these things where we catch up on all these stories. What a day. You can't stay on the air very long without having a sexual harassment charge be leveled against someone. I guess that's proof of concept there. Thanks for sticking with us. Let's do our best to stumble through the rest of the day here in our disbelief. Karen suggesting here, by the way, Franken should resign when Trump resigns. And maybe that's not a bad suggestion. This is going to refocus attention on Trump. It's going to be almost impossible to escape that, but the country is very practiced at looking away from allegations made against high officials, and the higher they rise, the more apt people are to look away because the consequences of their resignation is that much greater. Wow. Well, do stay tuned for more programming excellence here on Netroots Radio after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
What's coming up next today? Of course, we're still waiting for the debut of Justice's new program on Monday. Do stay tuned for that. We'll have the best of the Union Edge following today's program. So, you know, there's quality programming of all times, and this in particular coming up right here on Netroots Radio next. We'll be back tomorrow, despite it all.